Hello, my friends, and welcome to the cottage gardens at the Elliott Homestead. We have some work to do out here today, so we thought we would bring you along and kind of show you what that looks like. If you're new to gardening, it can be a little overwhelming to know what tasks to do when, how you take care of things. Really, it's super simple. I call it sweeping through the garden, which is exactly what we need to do down here. We call this area our greenhouse gardens, and it's gotten the short end of the stick so far this spring. We need to mulch pathways, we need to weed, we need to very sadly pull out a few things that died over the winter time and overall make it look quite a bit better than it looks right now. I've got some piles of rubble, which is not a good habit to get into, but why don't you come along with me and we'll spend the morning together in the garden. Thank you to Birch Living for sponsoring. You can shop their Memorial Day sale by visiting birchliving.com/Elliott Homestead. You can shop your new mattress at a 25% discount and get 2 free EcoRest pillows. After putting a full day in the garden, it's essential that my body rests and sleep well, which it does every single night on a Birch mattress. Unlike other brands, Birch mattresses are free of fiberglass, polyurethane foams, unnecessary chemicals, and pollutants. The wool in Birch mattresses also makes it hypoallergenic and mildew resistant. They offer you a 100-night sleep trial, 25-year warranty, flexible payment plans, financing options, free shipping, even in-home setup and removal. I sleep on my Birch mattress every single night, and I'm so grateful every single night. You can visit birchliving.com/Elliott Homestead to get 25% off your Birch mattress plus 2 EcoRest pillows today. All right, so this is the edge behind me here of our kept flower gardens thus far. Beyond that is some wild grasses that we still need to do some work with. Sadly, I lost a rose over here. If you're a Substack subscriber, you read about the death of many of my roses over the winter. So I've planted that recently in a clematis that's going to climb up the arbor behind me. But what you see now here is basically what I still need to sweep through. So we put in this gravel years ago and it worked fairly well. But we get so hot here in the summertime that it just felt like the pathways were really dry and really hot. So last year, we instead put a good thick layer of bark on the pathways, and it made the gardens have a totally different feel. It almost gave it this like cool woodland vibe that we really enjoyed. This area never got done, so I'm really behind the ball on this one. So Stu is going to come and help me finally get some bark on here, and then we're just going to start on one edge and work our way through. So I'll often come through with a bucket, pick up, like if you've got kids, you'll end up with random things like this in your garden. So there's usually a trash bag, there's usually a weed bucket, and then we can just start on one edge and keep moving through so that we know as we go along, everything's been attended to. So if it needs to be pruned, it gets pruned. If it needs to be weeded, if we need to put some rocks back in place, if we need to put mulch on the pathway or some additional compost in the compost bed, it all gets done at the same time as we move through. I don't know if this is the most efficient way to work through a garden, but it's the way that's really rewarding for me visually because you can sort of see your progress as you go along. So that's what we're gonna do. So we're gonna need to bring in some bark. Let's start with that. All right, this is a fairly new bed. It's a few years old now, but we've sort of changed it multiple times, so it's still getting established. These that you can see behind me here are everywhere in my garden. These are hollyhocks. And if you're not good about pulling off the flowers before they go to seed, the birds love them and they will spread them absolutely everywhere, which is what has happened down here. I happen to love hollyhocks, and so I let them go in certain places in certain amounts, but there's still some of these in the pathway that are gonna have to be pulled out, but they'll get really tall, like 6 to 8 feet tall. I have pink ones and peach ones and black ones and white ones, so they're gonna add a lot of color and a lot of height to the summer garden. But this is what they look like now, just a lot of greenery. That peony back there is one of my very favorite flowers that I have in my entire garden. And it's also just a few years old. so it has some establishing to do still, but it'll give me a few extra blooms every single year. I love them. I cannot get enough of them. It actually took my breath away when I found it. I found it at Lowe's years ago. I've never seen another one since. The lupin, which is this purple flower, is just on its way out. That's a fairly early spring flower, and it also will self-seed. So when I find little baby ones, I'll let them come up. They have tap roots, so they really don't like to be moved. So typically where they self-sow is where I leave them. What else do we have back here? A climbing rose that's supposed to be going up the side of the greenhouse, but isn't because it died back all the way to the ground this year. So that's having to get completely reestablished. You can just see some of the fresh ones coming up. We've got some black currants down here. We've got some catmint. And I think that's about it. Some lady's mantle I'm trying to get established in here as well. Has this beautiful green fluorescent color to it. And then along the pathway, if you saw me being kind of careful about where I put the bark, I've got some cosmos and some bells of Ireland that just self-sow here every single year. So right now they're just these teeny tiny little flowers coming up, or little starts coming up. Most of them will push their way through the soil, but they're gonna add a lot of flowers to the summer garden as well. So a few more years, this should fill in really nicely. This beautiful ground cover, oh my goodness, birdie, is called Snow in Summer. And this is one that we have all, move out of the way. This is one that we have all over the gardens. Usually you can get a few blooms from it every year, but you can see when it is in bloom, it covers everything in white, like snow in summer. Imagine that. The only problem with ground covers here is because when we moved in, this entire property was grass. So grass will be something that we combat for many years to come. And so when something covers the ground like this, every once in a while you'll get, not every once in a while, all the time, you'll get grass poking up through the perennial. It drives me a bit crazy. It's never gonna be perfect. I try to just keep it as manageable as I can. But this is a beautiful flower for having draped over the sides of rock walls or over big spreads of pathways. So I tend to plant it towards edges so that it can kind of creep and crawl where it like. Ideally, I would like this to spread all the way to the arbor, but that takes time. I planted this probably about 3 years ago, and you can see how much it's grown in that time. It'll just kind of continue to spread in a really beautiful way. Relatively speaking, I don't think I actually have that many garden tools, but it is really crucial to have some that you get along with really well, ones that you like to have in your hand. So for me, that looks like these big long pruners, because you can cut off things like lavender or mint after they've bloomed. So I always have these around. I also have these bigger pruners because as the gardens have gotten more established, stems are bigger. And so I used to get by with just being able to use handheld pruners, and I can't do that anymore. So like for branches of trees or rose limbs or whatever, these ones come around with me to whatever garden that I'm working in. I also wear this little belt. This is, Stuart used to frame houses, and this was his like tool belt. So it's, and I think it was given to you secondhand, wasn't it? So it's really old. But I've got like my seed markers, seed packets. This, I don't even know what this tool is called. I got it from Johnny's. This is my most used garden tool, bar none. I use this all the time for everything. So it lives in my left pocket. My pruners live in my right pocket. And then I keep my cell phone with me when I'm outside too. Other than that, this is my most favorite tool. This is a stirrup hoe. And this is my first year with it, and I've already used it more hours than I can count. So like you've seen me using it in the pathways. What I love about it is it just cuts things off at the root. It has a sharp blade on this side and a sharp blade on this side. So you can cut if you're coming and cut if you're going, cutting. you can also be really selective. So I can go in between plants and just scrape a bit and pluck out a weed. It's so helpful. So if you don't have one of these, this could be a great tool to get in your tool belt. Get one of these, and get one of these, whatever the heck they're called. Do you know what this is called?
It's a spade.
Is it?
Some kind, yeah.
Okay. I'll try to remember and find a link and stick it below the video so you guys can get one. Anyway, all right. We need to clean up this huge pile. I have got to get out of this habit. Much better to put it on a tarp that you can drag out of the garden so you're not having to dig away at the pathways, or put it in a bucket. Much better. Every garden has its troublesome areas. This is one of mine. All the edges of our gardens that back up against the orchards behind us are really tricky because they grow grass in the orchards. And so we're always fighting between my garden line and their grass, which can make it really tricky, which is exactly what's happened in this garden. This little teeny tiny far away corner has always been a little bit of a rejected space, just because out of sight, out of mind. So you can see all of this grass that's grown into this bed. So this year we've been combating this grass with this, which is old and rotted hay. So we're using this as a very thick mulch to try to squash some of these kind of perennially bad areas. So we're gonna just top dress it, this whole area. And some of this grass, I'm not even gonna pull out. I'm actually just gonna fold it onto its side. So long as I keep putting mulch on so that it can't ever get to the top and access sunlight, it will kill it. Just like when you put a tarp over your grass, you don't necessarily have to dig the grass up to kill it. You gotta snuff off what it wants, which is sunlight. The bonus is that it helps suppress any little weeds and it helps to retain moisture. The downside is that when you have a garden like I have here, where I let things self-seed, and that's part of how they naturalize and how they spread, if you've got a super thick mulch on top of your soil, those things aren't gonna be really able to self-seed. So this can really only be done in areas where you've got a few big things that you can mulch around. Our almond tree that you see here barely survived the winter. We had some weird fluke weather system that really did some damage to some of our trees and to a lot of our roses. So we're gonna nurse this along this year, but I've got that to work around. I've got this rambling rose here, which thankfully survived. I've got a rhubarb behind me, but other than that, there's really nothing in this bed. It needs to be planted. If your bed is full of flowers, your weeds will be so much less. But where there's exposed soil that has access to water and sunlight, you're gonna have a lot of weeds. So my birthday is next week, and I'm thinking that maybe a trip to the nursery would be in order so that we could plant this with a few big plants that would grow in and snuff out some of these weeds and some of these grasses. But in the meanwhile, we're just gonna top dress it, get it looking good, get it watered, and get it ready for more planting, more growth. This is a nice garden to work yourself into because it's our only shade garden that we have on the entire property. So this oak tree was obviously here when we moved in. Sure. And it's incredible. It casts this incredible shade over this whole spot of the garden. So I grow different things here than I can grow elsewhere because it has so much shade. Right now, this bee balm is in bloom, which is so wonderful because it always brings the bumblebees and the honeybees. It's fairly short-lived. As soon as the flowers die, you got to cut it back and it'll rebloom once more. But while it's beautiful, it's so beautiful. And sometimes we'll pick the petals off and freeze dry them so that they retain their color, and then you can use it like a flower confetti over cakes or cupcakes. They're such a beautiful color. This garden also, though, takes a lot of work because to my right is our grazing pasture. So again, when you don't have clear delineation, it can be really tricky. Even though we have a fence line, if something goes to seed in the pasture, then those seeds will inevitably blow in here and cause chaos. This is probably one of our most prevalent weeds. This is one that we call white top. We try to get it before the top goes white. It pulls up fairly easy. It's just annoying and it's everywhere. And it's been a few weeks since I've made it through this garden. So even though there's all kinds of things growing in and it's really self-seeded and filled in nicely, I need to comb through every now and again, clear the pathway, and then pull up any of the white top. And then our second most prevalent weed in here, which is morning glory. And I'll show you that when I find some, which will not be very long. Sometimes working through the garden means these like big dramatic pruning sessions or clean sweeps of the grass area like we just did over there. Sometimes it gets a lot more meticulous than that, and there are some things that no tools can do other than your hands. So this is a perfect example. This is a garden that I want to feel natural and I want it to self-seed. So what you see here are all spotted dead nettles that have self-seeded. And so if I were just to come in here with a tool and just kind of blindly clear things, I would be missing out on all these free plants. This is lady's mantle that I was talking about earlier. It does these really beautiful chartreuse flowers, and it also self-seeds very readily. So I've got weeds and I've got plants. And even look here at my feet. This is a Virginia creeper, which I don't want in a pathway. But if you look in here, there's more Virginia creeper. These are all violets, wild violets that I sowed, and they are so good at spreading everywhere. So if I see flowers in the pathway, I typically let them go because it fills in, it gives me options for changing things up in the future, and it just gives you more flowers. So this is now the stage of clearing through this garden where the bulk stuff has been done, and now it's time for the gardener to come in and get meticulous about what stays and what goes, and that ultimately shapes the garden.